Hello, and you're very welcome to this, our final Signpost webinar for 2024. Today, we'll be discussing the critical role of farmers that farmers have to play in protecting nature amidst a growing biodiversity crisis. And we know the farmers are hugely engaged in this topic, and this is something that we really want to explore today. And today, we'll be taking a less formal approach to our webinar, and we're delighted to be joined by Éanna Ní Lamhna, who's author and broadcaster. Éanna, you're very welcome to this morning's webinar. If you want to unmute yourself, Éanna, you can join the conversation.
I can
And
unmute you and say thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
you're very welcome. And we're also delighted to be joined by Pat Murphy. It's hard for me to say this, but former head of environment knowledge transfer in Teagasc. Pat, you're looking well.
Thank you very much.
So, Pat, you're very good to join us.
It's suiting.
Pardon?
I say retirement life is suiting me.
Good. Okay, you'll be the poster boy, so for retirement for the rest of the Teagasc. And Cathal Somers, good morning to you. You're going to be helping out with questions this morning.
That's right, Mark. Good morning. We're in good company today, so I'd say we'll have a good discussion lined up. Just to remind people to put plenty of questions into the Q&A tab the whole way through. You don't need to wait to the end. Anything pops into your mind, throw them into the quick Q&A tab.
Brilliant. So we're going to be covering a broad range of topics this morning, but I think it's always good to take a time out to reflect on the really good work that's happening across the agri-food sector. We're in a far different place than we were 10 years ago, and it's been a really important period for that transformation in agriculture to take place. Maybe, Éanna, if I could start with you. We talk about biodiversity crisis, we talk about ecosystem health. Why is it so important that we put our efforts into protecting nature?
Well, it is very important because we have a huge influence on nature, the way we live, whether we're farmers or not. The way we live in the world has a huge influence on the creatures we share it with. And here in Ireland, since the 1970s, we have lost over half of our biodiversity. Now, that doesn't mean that we've lost species as such, but we've lost the numbers of things. So we've hardly any corncrakes left, we've hardly any curlews left, but they're not extinct. But the numbers of them have all gone down. And the reason why that is because the place where they live, the habitat that they live in, is not suitable for them any longer. So by changing the habitats where the biodiversity is, then what we're doing is changing our environment, and for the worse for all of us, because having a healthy place with habitats, it gives you resilience against this climate change, against the excess rainfall we have, the areas where water is stored, like bogs. If they're gone, okay, the hares and the snipe are gone, but also that whole big body that held the water up in the mountains and away from your land, that's gone too. It's the same then with rivers and flooding. If your rivers aren't working properly, then you have problems with flooding. These are the things that biodiversity is affect. So it's not just whether we have 10 robins or 40 robins, it's actually the whole area, the whole habitat, where they are and where they live. And as our climate changes, we need the resilience from them. So it's nearly, in a way, self-preservation to a certain extent. We can't say, well, sure, it doesn't matter whether they're there or not. We're all right. But we're not all right, because we are actually part of the biodiversity. And that's something we have to understand. It's not just for the good of the fox or the good of the crow. It's for the good of us all that we must make the place suitable for everything.
There is also, I mean, you present the argument there for humans and the benefits for humans, but there is also the argument of, that the value, the intrinsic value of nature itself, and there's a lot of people to discuss that about how why as humans are we the ones that should prevail.
Oh yeah, that annoys me intensely when they say, well, I mean, how much is a frog worth? How much? I mean, if we can't justify the existence of a frog, well, then should we get rid of it? I mean, what's our worth? I mean, why should you have curlew? Why should you have them? Are they going to make your land more valuable? I mean, there shouldn't be this financial justification, this reason. If we can't think of a reason why they should be there, because we haven't much imagination, well, then they shouldn't be there. of us. Who set us up in charge to say they shall be here and they shall not be here when they were, a lot of them were here long before we were? So it's habitat management is the answer, because the biodiversity lives in proper habitats and we have control over our habitats. I mean, you can't go out and kidnap 45 ladybirds and ask them to come on your land, but if you have the habitat there which suits them, then they will come. So our control is at habitat level, and that's where we've banjaxed it, and that's where we can fix it too.
And from a practical perspective, then, for farmers watching in this morning, what sort of advice would you offer, Éanna, in terms of attracting those types of species?
Well, I mean, the thing is, you have to see what do wildlife need. I mean, you can put up an owl box, which is a lovely thing to do, and you're creating a place for the owls to breed. But they're not going to come fast. And if there's no food around the area, it's like having a hotel and the dining room doesn't ever open. I mean, if you haven't got food for them, if you haven't got the wherewithal, they're small mammal feeders. If there's no small mammals on your land because you've decided to put out permanent bait or something like that, all the barn owl boxes in the world is not going to get a pair of barn owls to come back. So it's looking at it. So they need somewhere to live. They need habitat. They need food. They need water. They need shelter. They need more than just putting out the thing for them. I mean, you're talking about pollinators putting out flowers so that they will have pollen and they will have nectar, and that will encourage them to be there. But that's not enough if you have no shelter. With the banks where you're putting in the bee holes are too exposed, so you don't keep it uncovered. And of course, then the other thing is, if you're spraying and putting out poisons for your crops, that's not going to do those any good either. So it's a whole look at the habitat, not just I'll do this one thing and then they'll all come back. They won't. It's more than that.
Mm-hmm. I think it's fair to say that there has been an enormous shift in mindset at a farmer level. There's a growing respect and for biodiversity, and obviously the benefits from a human and farming perspective as well that they bring. Pat, you have been involved in environmental, I suppose, conservation through Teagasc and through your role over the last 14 years. What would you say has been that main sort of mindset evolution that you've observed over the years?
I suppose there's a couple of things. One is, I suppose, a realization that agriculture, by its very existence, is having an impact on a range of environmental issues, be it water quality, be it greenhouse gases, or biodiversity. So I suppose there was a degree of denial for a long time that oh, we're just farming this, we're not having impact. And I think that I suppose acceptance that just by virtue of the fact that we are managing the land, that we are having an impact. I think the second thing is that and this is something that I suppose we've learned, and particularly learned in relation to the work we're doing on water quality. It was very evident that as soon as you start to engage with farmers in relation to the trying to get them to understand and helping them understand the impacts that they're having and what can be done to counteract those impacts, that you get cooperation, you get people to work with you. I think one of the key issues and the key challenges that we have is the lack of understanding of the impacts that we're having. I think by their very nature, farmers are supportive of nature and want to do the right thing, but sometimes just don't realize the impact they're having. And when they do, and when they understand how to sometimes turn around those impacts, they're quite willing to work with us to do that. Sometimes need to be supported, but a lot of the time they will just go and do the right thing.
And what would you say were the sort of major changing points over the years, or even some of the actions that Teagasc would have supported over the years to help that transition?
Yeah, and I suppose for a lot of the time I was working in the environment, the kind of level of resource that was there to support farmers in this area was limited enough. We would have had, I suppose, back into the 90s, advisors working with the farmers to implement schemes, but it was very much if you want a transactional approach, you do this and you get your payment, and a lot of good came out of that, a lot of learning came out of that. But and I suppose right from the beginning, that one of the things that was part of those schemes was the education piece around it, which was very positive, but again was probably a little bit more on the transactional side. And I think one of I suppose the things that we're trying to do more now is to help people to understand the impacts, to understand the environment that's out there, to understand the impacts we're having on various species, so that it's less about the transaction and about I suppose the creation of the habitat, and it's more about understanding how we are impacting on I suppose the ecosystems and on the species that live on the farms, and how we can improve the outcomes for those. So it's again, it comes back down to building an understanding of the nature that's around us amongst the farmers, and so that they can implement actions that can help.
And Éanna, do you think we really fully understand the impact of our activities on nature and biodiversity? And do we understand even how to measure it, given its complexity?
I don't think the impact of how we've been living in this country for the last 50 years has really rung home in general. I mean, because it doesn't happen quickly enough, in the sense that it wasn't that they were all here last week and they're not here this week. It's when you have an older farmer and a younger farmer, and the older farmer remembers that bit down there in the field. That was where the corncrakes were. This is when they came, and they used to be here at the beginning of May, or they came in whatever. And now they don't come at all. Whereas the younger farmer never knew that was there, because the field got drained, they got more grass, they got more whatever it is, and they got richer, but they didn't see the value of them. So little by little, you got a bigger tractor, you couldn't get into the field, you had to get the hedges down, you had to make the opening bigger. There was no point in having 3 small fields when you could have 1 big field. So little by little, it wasn't that there was scorched earth policy, it was the death by 1,000 cuts, if you like. And over the 50 years, it has diminished. I mean, if you could go back in the time, I mean, and sometimes if you go on way to another country which is much poorer than Ireland, I'm thinking of parts of Eastern Poland and places where I went on holidays a couple of years ago, it was like, when I was young, so many swallows, so much stuff that, we still see swallows, but you don't see droves of them anymore. We still, go on your bicycle and you might get a fly in your eye. But I mean, over there, you'd have to wear glasses. There was so much insects in the, so it's little by little we've diminished it. And it's only old ones like me that remember how it used to be. Whereas the younger people, and they're in air-conditioned cabs, and of course they are, and life is better than sitting out in a cold tractor. You're not cutting the grass with a scythe. You're not seeing bees' nests that you would if you were using a scythe. But I'm not saying we should go back to using scythes, not at all. But I mean, the thing is, there was more connection with the slower way of farming, and therefore you knew what was there. Now it could be there or it's not there, but you're up in your tractor with your air conditioned, and you're doing that. You're not as close to it, and it's only stories that your grandparents or your parents tell you about it. So it's happened inexorably. And if you do these grassland studies of looking at your field and see how many species you've in them, I mean, a good rich grassland would have, they could have 50 or 60 different species over the year in the field, or it could have 2, depending on what you've done to it. And
that's only looking above the ground.
That's only looking above the ground. But I mean, that's the thing. It's the plants. The plants are the key, because habitats are depending, the animals depend on the plants. And if you don't have the right plants, you can't have the animals. So you can't have a whole load of bees if there's no flowers. And if you have no flowers, then you can't have all the insects associated with those. If you don't have a different variety of trees in your hedge, and really we saw that 30 years ago when all the elm trees died, but we're seeing it again now with the decline in the ash, and indeed God knows in some places there's actually a fire blight on the hawthorn as well. So, I mean, this is having a huge impact on our hedges. We never realised how much elm we had until it all died. I mean, elm in the olden days was the only timber, it still is, but I mean, in the olden days, it was the only timber pigs couldn't eat. So when you got a county council cottage with half an acre and you had a pigsty, like where I come from in County Louth, there were cottages like that with the pigsty. You had to make the door out of elm, otherwise the pig would eat its way out of it because they were always starving. But if you made the door out of elm, and there was loads of elm to make timber, to make doors or pigsties with, no problem. There's no elm trees now, small little things that when they get to 15 years, the Dutch elm disease comes back again. So what biodiversity have we got in our hedges? I mean, we have hazel, we have hawthorn, but holly, we've all these other trees, but don't be putting up the electric wire. Put your hedges back and plant them in, and even if the species are deciduous, I mean, if it's going to grow on your land and it's going to be a habitat for the insects and the birds, hedgerows are really important habitats because they're wildlife corridors up and down fields. So look at your land and look at it from the drone of the air and see where the field lines were once and how many fields was it and how many fields is it now, and think of all that boundary, all those areas where the insects and plants and birds were gone. But you didn't pull them all out. But over the time and over the period, over the last 50 years, if you had a picture of the farm then and a picture of the farm now, in a lot of cases, huge differences. But they happened gradually, and the diminishment, there wasn't a massacre on the whole place, wasn't full of dead robins, but it just got diminished and diminished and diminished. And that's the thing, we have to push it back. If we could take it out, we should be able to put it back if we want to. If we think
sadly,
it's
I suppose farmers were encouraged to do that at the time,
I
and there
know.
were
I mean, I'm not
policy
saying
incentives to make fields bigger and more productive, and so thankfully we're in a more, I suppose, nuanced and
actually, they were
informed
paid to
policy
do it and then
environment.
they were paid to undo it. I mean, they were
Yes,
paid to have sheep, then they were paid not to have sheep. I
yes.
mean, the farmers are not to blame in the sense that you have to make a living, you have a wife and kids, you have to make money, and if this is what you have to do, but it's this directives, they change them whenever they get a new point of view, and it's every time they changed it, they're going back to something that was there before, but they see the error of their ways. So pointing out that the regulations shouldn't be changed for a disadvantage to the environment has to be found out the hard way in a lot of cases, it would seem to me.
And Pat, that's something that has changed, I think, a lot in the last number of years, is how, the policymakers are using research to inform the decisions. We see the results-based schemes, we see the European innovation partnerships. That surely is having an impact, or trying to inform and develop better schemes, the piloting of schemes as well in smaller areas.
I think that there's been a huge change over the last number of years, and I suppose that the last CAP and the most recent CAP have taken on the results-based scheme to a whole new level, and in a way that took I suppose a couple of things. One is it took a learning process, and the EIPs. There's been quite a number of them. There was 23 or 4 of them in the last CAP. There was the couple of big ones with the burning program, the hen harrier and the freshwater pearl mussel. But then there was a series of 20, mainly in the environmental area. And there was a huge amount of learning has come from that, where you're talking about taking maybe in a small area or in a small area of study, looking at what can be implemented and what can be done to improve outcomes. And I suppose one of the example areas was what was done in a number of upland EIP studies, and we've learned a huge amount from the likes of the work that was done in the Wicklow area. There was a small one in the Comoras, and again, which focused on working with farmers and helping farmers understanding. And I think what's has emerged from those has been, I suppose, an integration of those into the broader agri-environmental schemes, a huge amount of learning, and then the implementation of those. And I suppose that the current agri-environmental scheme, the acre scheme, in its, I suppose, two phases. The upland areas are the cooperation project areas, where it's very much a full results-based approach. That to me was a really brave step by the Department of Agriculture. It was novel at a European level. It was extremely difficult and is proving extremely difficult to implement. It's new. It's taken people a long time to get to grips with it. But I would be confident that it's going to yield really extraordinary results over a period. And I suppose we've a lot of learning to happen there still in how it's implemented and to streamline that. And there's a lot of work involved in it for advisors and for farmers. But I think ultimately it is the direction we need to be moving in. And it has emerged through, I suppose, a gradual learning through some of the other EIP projects. So I think a lot has happened in Ireland over the last number of years to move things forward, and we're still in learning mode.
Cathal, we have some very interesting questions coming through from our audience there, I see.
Yeah, super questions and a nice variety. So I just encourage people to keep them coming when we have two good people in the room to answer. Just to start off, there's lots of comments coming in, and I'm just going to read one in particular one out because I thought it was just a really nice tune to it. The idea of a connection with nature is very interesting and eloquently put by Éanna. So that's a nice way to put it, I'd say. But Éanna, just based on something you said there a minute ago, you were talking about the policies, and whoever's in power puts policies in, and farmers follow those policies. And that's one of the comments here, that farmers generally follow policy. Is there anything that if you could wave a magic wand, that you could bring in a policy that might make some improvements to biodiversity or have a positive impact?
Well, I don't know. I mean, a magic wand would be a wonderful thing. I mean, to improve our environment all around, it has to be managed with a less heavy hand. So, no penalisation of farmers for leaving their land for nature, not necessarily managing it, not necessarily planting trees, not necessarily planting wild bird cover, but just leaving a bit more in the edges of the field all around when you're planting a crop, the hare's corner, if you like, keeping the banks removed of vegetation so that you can actually have access for bees and things to get in. But it's little things. I mean, the idea that the water quality has deteriorated over my lifetime is awful. I mean, the EPA, I used to work in Forest Forbaha, which is the forerunner of the EPA way back in the 1970s, and they were testing water quality then. I mean, the water quality testing in the EPA goes on from that. So there were actually water quality records going back from the time Forest Forbaha was set up in the 1960s, actually. And there were huge amounts, thousands of pristine sites. They put up permanent sites and they tested. And pristine meant there was absolutely no pollution of any description. And the water quality had loads of oxygen in it. It might be in upland areas, which was oligotrophic, but there was load. And now these are down, there's only 40 pristine sites left of those ones. 40. I mean, they're not, you wouldn't walk upon the water. I'm not saying they're full of sewage or anything, but they've gone down from being pristine and to the next level. And once it goes, it's hard to get it back. And these affect the pearl mussels. I mean, the River Nore was full of pearl mussels. It still is, but they're ancient. They're even older than me, because the pearl mussels can live to 150, 200 years, but they can't reproduce at this later stage because the quality of the water, it's not bad enough to kill them, but it's not pristine enough for their spawn to actually take. And yet that part of Southeast Ireland, whenever these mussels were young, the water quality was pristine to allow that. And we look at the southeast of Ireland now and we think how much nitrogen there is and the nitrates that are in the water and all of this. But these things didn't come in the Nore, in the parcel. I mean, the quality of the southeast was good enough, and these are the kind of the indicator species. So it's this slow attrition all the time that if I could have a magic wand, I would stop. But if I knew how to do it, it would be easy and someone else would have done it by now. I mean, the people in charge are not having a death wish. So if I could say what I should do is, well, then the question is, why is somebody else not doing it? It's not as easy as all that. I've been doing it all my life, educating people, trying to say, you know, we're only one of many species in the world. But a magic wand, I don't believe in magic wands, really.
You just mentioned the pearl mussel there, and there's a lot of work being done in pearl mussels, but I would come across a lot of farmers and they have never heard of a pearl mussel. Are we doing something wrong?
Well, I mean, the pearl mussels are not common, and they don't actually have pearls in them either. It's not as if you can go out and get a few and get a necklace for your missus and you won't have to go into the shops. I mean, the pearl mussels are first of all, they're in water that goes through limestone because they have shells. Obviously, you're not going to get them up in the higher areas where you have acid water. And they're down at the bottom of the river. I mean, people who went to their rivers were going fishing. They were looking for salmon. They were looking for trout. They weren't really looking for pearl mussels in the first instance. So ordinary folks wouldn't necessarily know, but they were there if you went to look. There's different other ones. There's pea mussels as well, and different other ones that are in water like that. But if you thought that was there in your land once and your land was that good and now it isn't, you know, you kind of think it was a black mark against you. So it's the education of, and this is what's happening, as Pat was saying, you know, that farmers do surveys of their species on their fields. What many species have they got? And the more they have, the better it is. I mean, this is a huge educational thing to be doing, and I greatly welcome it. I mean, starting with the flowers in the field and the things you can see is the first step, because farmers are farmers. Don't have degrees in botany. They don't have degrees in water quality the way the experts who come around do. So moving them on then to checking the water quality is part of that sort of citizen science for farmer citizen science, if you like. But the surveys of the plant species, Pat, that's going well enough, is it?
Yes, I suppose it's on a cycle as part of the scheme, where farmers have gone into the results-based program, that it's on a 3 years or in a 2-year cycle throughout the scheme. So I suppose it's still relatively new. There's areas have been identified and there's payments coming in for those areas, and I suppose it's going to take a long time to start to see improvements there. But it's about, again, you talked about it earlier, it's about how we manage those. You're not going to see results unless the management is appropriate for those species, and I suppose we're understanding more in recent times about that if you want to get that wide diversity in certain areas, it requires, I suppose, a lack of nutrient going into it, because if we provide the nutrient, we'll favor the ryegrass type species, and it's just a combination of understanding the management and then monitoring the impacts of those that's going to deliver results over a period in those areas.
And it certainly shouldn't be seen to be either or. If you're kind to wildlife, if you're kind to biodiversity, that means your farming income, your farming goes down. One should not mitigate against the other. I mean, good farming practice, producing food in a positive way for the environment, is the way forward. I mean, I see that myself in the work I do with the conservation, the rodenticide use, the campaign for responsible rodenticide use. The more that goes wrong, the more there's going to be fewer and fewer rat poisons available. Whereas if you have an integrated pest management scheme, you know, that's the way forward. So, I mean, producing stuff with the aid of the worst possible poisons and fewer species is not considered on the general way as a positive way to produce food. And I mean, from that point of view alone, how the food is produced on the farms is more and more being considered needs to be done with best farming practice, with a good outcome for biodiversity, rather than factory farms. And Ireland has always had a good reputation for this, and we should really build on that as well.
There's kind of a comment and a question in here, Pat, for you. I would say you mentioned about surveying biodiversity. I suppose the question is, how can we understand our improvements? And the comment is the biodiversity baselines are a little bit sketchy. Is there more to be done there?
Yeah, I think the Biodiversity Data Centre and Citizen Science is doing a huge amount of work to try and I suppose, help us understand the status of a very wide range of species and also potentially looking at habitats. But absolutely, I mean, we look at it from a greenhouse gas, a water quality perspective. Until we measured and started to understand the status of what we had, we weren't in a position to start improving it. And the very same goes, I think, for biodiversity. Until we understand and get a sense of what's out there and where the problems are, you can't go about resolving them. And that's why the work of the biodiversity data centre, the likes of Birdwatch Ireland, who are keeping tabs on in relation to bird populations, and even and I suppose and especially down to people getting involved in citizen science and keeping records and helping in the collection of that data, it's hugely important to build that understanding.
And there's, oh, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to pass. Cathal asked you a question about having a free hand or the magic wand. If you had a Christmas list now to put together for, based on your long experience in this area, what do you think would be the key changes you'd like to see happening from a policy point of view, or for supports for farmer education? Or, I'd just be very interested in, given you have a unique perspective on this.
Yeah, I think I suppose a huge amount has happened in the last few years, and the fact that we have, I suppose, Cathal and some of his colleagues working now in relation to water quality, supporting farmers in terms of improving water quality. We have a similar in relation to greenhouse gases with the Signpost advisory. I think we do need additional support, and over the last number of years, we've I suppose in Teagasc there has been extra people involved in that space, but I think it's I suppose a work heavy. It's requires boots on the ground, and I think a follow on of support for farmers in biodiversity. I think until we get some boots on the ground in relation to that, we're not going to see the likes or the level of improvement that we need. So I think that's one thing. I think we have the likes of Éanna and a number of other advocates for biodiversity, and I think that's absolutely necessary. And I suppose we have some in the farming community who are taking the mantle. And I think one of the huge changes we've seen over the last couple of years has been some of the leadership now that's going on within the farming organizations across a range of environmental issues. And I think that leadership that's now emerging from the farming organizations, that to me is hugely important, and I'd like to support it. And it goes across industry, and I look at in this space over the last 10 years, I suppose the relationships and the cooperation that's gone on with Teagasc, but with the dairy co-ops and increasingly meat industry. I think what you're seeing is a coalition and a strong leadership, and I suppose on top of that, then we do need some potentially more boots on the ground to support farmers in doing the right things. But then you pointed out, and Cathal asked the question about the data and understanding. I suppose the building of understanding of the impacts that we're having and of the potential solutions that are there, that how farmers can make changes, sometimes small changes, to improve outcomes, I think is hugely important. And I think the other, I suppose, area, taking an example of the upland areas, I suppose our focus over the years in upland has been around the farming of upland for sheep production, but much more so over the last couple of years. We've been looking at, I suppose, a multiplicity of outcomes from farming in those areas. It's about sheep production and maybe traditionally would have been a bit more about cattle production, and the lack of cattle in some of these habitats has probably not done them any favors. But it's also about preserving these landscapes, these absolutely wonderful landscapes that we have and getting outcomes in terms of biodiversity, in terms of water quality, in terms of sequestration of carbon. But the other area that is coming into that is the whole, I suppose, tourist bringing in tourists and I suppose bringing people closer to nature and also having an ability to, I suppose, be paid for all of those outcomes is crucially important. So that if we rely, I suppose, on the sheep only in those landscapes, they will be left to potentially to go wild, and I don't think that's in any of our interests.
Yeah, certainly this idea of ecotourism is something that is more and more important. I mean, with air miles and the amount of travel people are doing, and the fact that our greenhouse gases are increasing enormously and temperatures accordingly as well. This idea of nipping off in your airplane and your holidays everywhere is something that we need to guard against. I mean, I was down in Galway there a couple of weeks ago, and it was raining. Sometimes it rains in Galway, and there was a crowd there. There was a family there from, it was Thanksgiving, so they were there from Colorado, and Mammy and Daddy and two kids, and the kids were delighted with the rain. They made Mammy and Daddy go out and buy them raincoats and welly boots, and they spent the afternoon in the playground with nobody else there, jumping in and out of the puddles. There's no rain, there's no puddles in Colorado, and it was only 12 degrees or 10 degrees. It wasn't -40 and it wasn't +30 either, you know. Now we don't appreciate how good we are when you put our climate up in a row with all the other climates in the world, where we're kilt apologising for the rain, we're kilt apologising for how cold it is. We have no idea how good our climate is. And it's only when you see people, other people, like, I mean, I remember going off with diving club one time out to Inishturk, and there was a woman in the boat. She had to wait till we were finished diving, and then we all went on to Inishturk. There's a grand pub there. We were all rushing up the hill for our pints after being under the water. And this woman from the Ruhr Valley, actually there was a field with a donkey in it, and it was bucketing rain, and she was there pointing at the donkey, and we were sorry for the woman because she'd been sitting in the boat for ages waiting on us. And when the lads went in and hooshed the donkey over to the gate, and there she was in the bucketing rain in the field rubbing this manky donkey, because in Germany a donkey was grand, I mean, but we had not much art of standing there to stroking a donkey in the rain, wasting good drinking time. But I mean, where she came from, there were no animals in the fields. There were nothing like this. The rain was Ruhr rain. It was acid rain. You wouldn't be standing out in it in the first instance. Like, that we don't appreciate what we have is something that is very well interesting to ecotourism. And then by having more things to hear, the birds to see, the hedges, the flowers, all of these things as well, the cuckoo, all of these things then are added attractions. So that, you know, and the more we get greenways and the more that there's proper access over the land, not trespassing on people's fields or anything like that, but the more that there's proper access through rural areas, the more we should be able to sell this idea of slowing down, going on your bike, walking, camping, not flying off somewhere where it's 40 degrees and you can't get outside the door and the kids are stuck to the furniture and you're sorry you ever went. We should be making more of this and doing it properly with our greenways, and we have more and more greenways, and it's becoming to be seen as a positive thing. And the more of that, I think, the better as well. I do feel very strongly about this.
Yeah, well, I think you need to have a chat with my kids, Éanna. We live in the west of Ireland. They don't always appreciate the rain, so
no, bring them somewhere else. Bring them somewhere else and have them sitting there for a fortnight stuck to the walls at 40 degrees. They'll be bloody glad to get on their wetsuits and run into the sea where it's only 14 degrees. You know, it's warm.
Yeah.
The Atlantic is warmer than the Irish Sea. The Irish Sea is 13 and it's 14. I mean, the seas over abroad are nearly too warm to be swimming in, and you know, that's all worse as well too. So, but like, value it because it's, you know, we want. If you don't value it, it'll go. If we keep thinking, oh, it's when climate change be grand, we could do it a bit more heat. It's not going to be like that. That's not what's happening. We can see with a bit more heat, and all we're getting is more rain. All we're getting is more energy in the storms. All we're getting is Holyhead doesn't work now because Storm Dara, and nobody can get home for Christmas. Never to speak of flooding. The amount of rain that comes is because of the heat. It's not that we're sitting about and getting suntans and it's been nice and warm in the summer. The heat is not that kind of heat, and it's not good for anything.
And another coming in here for you, and I think as well. Someone a bit of a comment actually. They have a real interest in the native Irish honeybee. And unfortunately, they've had a number of hives stolen in the last week, and they're just trying to want to warn viewers that there's hives getting lifted at the moment. And he's also encouraging people to protect their habitats. Can you tell us? I know our native Irish honeybee is one of a lot of species we have in Ireland. Can you tell us how we're doing on the bees at the moment?
Well, we have 101 species of bees. We used to have 99 for ages, which annoyed me, and then to discover 2 more. So we never had 100 evenly. We have 101. So one species is the honeybee. We have 20 bumblebee species, and the rest then are these solitary bees that are all hugely important for pollination, because bees actually collect pollen to feed their babies with, and when they go in then to collect nectar to make honey for themselves. So they visit flowers twice, big hairy bodies moving pollen from one thing to another. And if you don't have bees, you won't have pollination happening, and you won't have crops. You won't have anything that has flowers on it, won't be pollinated if there are no insects. So from that point of view, but the honeybee, the Irish honeybee, is a little black honeybee, and it's able to withstand, because we're at the very limit of habitat that's suitable for bees. There's no bees, no honeybees in Iceland. It's too windy, and the Shetland Islands is too well. So the Ireland and Donegal and the west of Ireland is the absolute limit. And it's the little black honeybee that's able to weather it. It's the one that's able to actually put up with the colder climates. Now the buckfast bee, this was brought in to breed with our queens to maybe get better honey, or maybe to get more docile bees. But the first whiff of wind or snow or cold, and they're all amshakatcha. So we need to keep the stuff that has been bred in Ireland to actually be suitable for the habitat it's in. And of course, then having proper hives with these in them are valuable things, with no half casts or ones from buckfast and things, proper full hives. And the poor man in Wicklow, somebody obviously realized that he had the genuine article and came and stole it. And the awful thing is, it probably was another beekeeper. I mean, most people are terrified of bees and wouldn't dream of going off and taking anyone's hive in case something happened to them. So, I mean, that point of thing is very bad. But the black honeybee is something that we really want to make sure that we're not mixing them with the other ones, because once we mix them, then you've interbred and the good quality is gone. So that's an I mean, we've bees in this country for, I suppose, 1,000 years anyway, more, that they're supposed to have come with the monks. There's all kinds of stories as to how they actually arrived, but they've evolved to suit the Irish climate, and they give us honey on the very limit of honey producing areas. In much more honey, warmer countries further south, that sort of thing. So it's very important that the honeybees will be here, and that they will do their thing, and that there is food for them. No point in having loads of honeybees if there's nothing to feed them on. You have to have the flowers. You have to have the flowers from the month of May, from the month of April, May, all the way till they finish up in October. And they finish up with ivy, and they collect the wonderful nectar that's in the ivy to make honey to tide them over the winter. So these maniacs who go around saying ivy is killing trees, talk to the bees. The bees won't want to hear this. The ivy doesn't kill the trees. Ivy grows faster on trees that are dead, but it didn't kill them in the first place. There's more light when there's no leaves. You know, when you get a bit thin on the top, there's more light coming through, and the ivy will grow. But the ivy is not the strangler fig. You're reading too many comics if you think the ivy is killing the tree. The ivy is taking advantage of a tree that's dying, but it didn't kill it in the first place. It has lovely flowers. This time of the year, there's been lots of ivy flowers, and this is a huge source of nectar and pollen for the bees at this time of the year. So a range of flowers right through is what's required.
I never heard of the buckfast bee, and you just mentioned monks brought in bees. Is that what the drink, the tonic wine, is made from? That pollen? Anyone my age group,
it's a monastery in England. I couldn't speak for what they do in England, but certainly in Ireland, mill is the Irish word for honey. And so Mina Mala, your honeymoon was when you went off and feasted on mead, because the Irish people very quickly realised this is a source of sugar, and if you ferment the sugar, you have alcohol, and if you have alcohol called mead, that's grand. This is long before there was any sugar beet or sugar cane or anything else. The bees were really valuable, and there's various, I mean, St. Governors, and there's different stories about bees. But But I mean, it was the management of the bees. I presume that the monks were able to do it, but there probably were bees here before. But to be able to keep them in a hive and to manage them so that you got some honey from them was obviously goes back to those times. But you know, lots of bees associated, but they're all the old Irish honeybee, which is the one that actually suits the place, and we should be proud of it. And the Buckfast ones, the beekeepers will do this, and they manage their hives and that. But the ones that, I mean, we got a varroa mite in then, which was bad management because they came in unscheduled on a truck someplace. And this is a disease of them now. So the poor old bees don't survive in the wild too long. The beekeepers need to manage them. So if a swarm escapes and goes into a hole in a tree, it won't last more than 2 or 3 years because the varroa will put an end to it. So the beekeepers are very valuable and important in managing the honeybees, making sure that the disease is kept away from them and that we have as many, because you can have up to 40,000 bees in a hive over the whole summer period. You're not, you know, whereas bumblebees and solitary bees, much fewer numbers in those, but the big numbers are in the honeybees.
Pat, you're very well placed for this next question. There's kind of a comment that family farming is starting to dwindle, particularly down in the south of the country, southeast, you know, where it's very productive land down there, that it's coming away, it's getting more big business. I suppose first question is, would you kind of agree that that's where we're going? And the second question is, you know, there's a comment that a lot of hedgerows and all are getting taken out, maybe are not being planted, maybe I would say, to make room for that productive land. Is that the way we're going, or what changes can we make to stop that?
Yeah, and I think if we compare ourselves, on retirement, I went out with a daughter in New Zealand and went out to visit, and you see the scale that's operating there. It has very much turned into business. You look at what's happened in the United States in terms of a lot of their farming there. I think we still have, by and large, a family farm structure, and I think it's really important that be maintained. In terms of the second part of it, in terms of the removal, I think that's something that yes, has happened, and I think it's something where I think we can reverse some of that. I think I suppose I would have a view that if you look at I suppose particularly dairy and tillage farmers, that every single one of them should be in an agri-environmental scheme. Putting in hedgerows where you see areas where hedgerows have been taken out to make massive fields. I think there's I suppose it was a mistake. You could argue that they were trying to make more manageable land for farming purposes, but I think we didn't realize what we would lose in the process of doing that, and I think most farmers probably now realize that there is a need to put back in some of those hedgerows to create a bit of space for nature. It has shelter impacts as well for animals. There's a whole series of reasons why it could be beneficial. I think on the other side of it, if you look at regulation and where it's going, I think we're going to be nudged into making sure that every farmer out there has a minimum level of space for nature. And I think that's going to be one of the pushes of policy over the next while. And I think then on top of that, if you try to make sure that space that we have for nature is, I suppose, doing its job, doing a good job for nature, that it's managed correctly, or as Éanna might say, not managed correctly. So I suppose I don't. Yes, there's an inevitability. I think that farm size will increase. That's I suppose that's a nature. That's the nature of development. That's we're able to manage more. We're more mechanized. So I suppose there's always pressure on incomes in farming, so they have to get bigger to survive. So there's going to be a degree of that. I would hope that we don't get to the massive very commercial farms that you see in some other areas, that we stick to a family model, and that family model can show an appreciation for, I suppose, a multifunctional agriculture that supports environmental objectives as well as income objectives. And I think we can manage that better than other places have managed it.
And do you see those incentives, Pat? Like you've seen a lot now over the last number of years in your role. The incentives, what do you think are going to work best? There's a kind of comment here that do we need to kind of go down the same road as like the carbon credit model where you get almost like biodiversity credits, or is that more or less kind of the same as result-based payments?
Yeah, I suppose the way I suspect things will happen is that the payments that are going to farmers currently will be much more heavily conditioned on environmental outcomes. I think we're moving in that direction. I suppose the eco scheme element of the farm payment is moving in that direction, and I can see over a period of years that hopefully we will retain support for farmers, but I would be very surprised if that support for farmers isn't much more around making sure that there are environmental outcomes, and I think that's good. That can be good for everybody.
We have, I will take it as a comment here, as a suggestion from a beekeeper who says if beekeepers had a magic wand, we would ban the import of honeybees so as to preserve our native black honeybees here in Ireland. Éanna, are you in agreement with that?
Yeah, that's right, because what they import are the ones to interbreed. They're not importing Irish honeybees. They're importing queens with other genes in them. And like the buckfast is just one I mentioned. There are other ones as well. And this, of course, is what he's talking about. So by being allowed to import them in the first instance, it's a way of bringing in diseases. It's a way of bringing in other species. It's a way of bringing in pests as well. So, you know, we need to breed up and keep
a simple measure that could
yeah,
be
absolutely, and then value it indeed. And the fact that his bees were being stolen show, I mean, it's very sad and I'm really sorry, but I mean, they have a value. Someone thinks they're worth stealing. I mean, you know, that these are something valuable and worth stealing. So, I mean, nearly in a way it's complimented, though it's not much good to the man in Wicklow, but you know, that these somebody sees that this is the way forward. These are the bees we need, you know, so, you know, we must look at it from that point of view.
Just to take a big picture look at the way policy and politics are going, and we're not political here on the show, but there's a comment here about the recent outcome from the election in Ireland. The Green Party didn't do so well, and we know Green parties across Europe haven't done so well either in recent times. Does that concern you, or do you feel that there's a change in has society changed with its views to the environment?
Well, it concerns me, I have to say, very much so that nearly looking after the environment was seen as the job of the Greens, and that seemed to be interfering with the way we live, and them crowd of cranks wanting us to not be doing this. That it was very polarized, and you know, the other political parties were well able to insinuate in their manifestos that they would look after the environment just as good. You didn't need a whole party to do this. This was part of everybody's DNA, which we have to wait and see. But the fact that all of the problems, you see, a lot of these regulations about the environment are translated as reducing the amount of money in your pocket. How are you going to get rid of your slurries if you've too many cows? And the nitrates directive is this. So it's all seen as less money in your pocket, that these are onerous ones. And if the Greens are considered to be the people who brought them in and we get rid of them, then we'll get rid of these onerous conditions. But that won't change the world. The world is still going to hell in a handcart. We're still making the world a worse place. Getting rid of the Greens is not going to change these things. And by putting the onus on the main parties to do this is not the way forward. So I am very concerned about it. I really am.
And just on that point about, you know, the cost neutral or cost positive type of measures, I know Teagasc has over the years put a lot of effort into focusing its efforts in measures for farmers that are, you know, that are friendly on the pocket, we'll say, but are also positive for the environment.
Well, I suppose that was pragmatic, that there wasn't funding there to take on a lot of others. I think we need a mix there. And I suppose one bugbear is that we have I suppose a regulation that if something becomes a regulation, you can't pay for it. And so I think we need to nuance that. Certainly, yes, we have unashamedly gone after, or Teagasc has unashamedly gone after, I suppose, cost benefit or cost neutral elements, particularly on climate change, because it felt that those are the I suppose the low-hanging fruit to try and improve farmers' income at the same time as improve environmental outcomes. It's an easier sell. We've seen it in water quality, that where things cost a significant amount of money and you're asking people to do it, it's not that surprising that there's a slow uptake on expensive options. And the EIP fund for the Farming for Water EIP, which is now being administered by LawPro and the ASSEP advisors. I think the approach there has been to target expenditure on actions that we know will have an impact. I think there's challenges facing us into the future that we need to look at. Where does the mix of regulation and support come in? And I think one of the areas that's going to hit first is going to be in relation to feed additives for reducing methane emissions, where there is no benefit to the farmer. There's a cost associated with it, but there is a very substantial benefit in terms of the reduction. May not come in without, and there's a few other examples where they may not come in without some level of regulation. But the hindrance to regulation is that as soon as you bring in a regulation, you can't pay for it anymore, and that's something I think that's going to have to be looked at in the policy sphere. There's some things I think that we're going to have to regulate for to bring in, but to compensate farmers for, and it's just I think an anomaly that's there that really needs to be looked at.
Éanna, one for you. There's a comment coming in, and we do have a lot of farmer viewers on wildflower mixes. A lot of our farmers think that's a really good thing to put in sometimes. What's your comments on that?
Yeah, it is a good idea to put in a wildflower mix, but the vital thing is that it must be a native species wildflower mix. You can't just go down to a shop and buy a bag of wildflower seed, because you may be bringing in seeds that are not actually native Irish species, and they sell them in supermarkets. And if you look at the mix, and you know the Irish plants, you're bringing in plants maybe that aren't native, are going to become invasive, whatever. But there are places like in Carlow where you have Sandro Cafola, who has a long established reputation, giving people bags of Irish seed depending on your soils, whether you have acid soil, alkaline soil, wetland, woodland, whatever it is you want. So putting in native Irish seeds in an area is excellent. But really, the first thing is to stop mowing, stop spraying, see what comes up anyway. Leave the thing alone, unmanaged, because the seed banks in the soil go way back. Remember in Flanders Field, the poppies flow, and that was grassland that they dug for graves. And those poppy seeds that had been there 40, 50 years ago germinated. So there's a seed bank in the soil of stuff that was there before. Let that have a go first before you start adding in wildflower seeds. The first step is to let it grow, stop mowing, and then after that, if you need to augment it, use Irish seeds.
I have a really good comment from somebody here that when we're talking about the acres courses came up, and we're talking about and I think you mentioned it could be 40 plus species in a really biodiverse grassland, but farmers up till then, when they looked down and saw all these species, they would have identified them as weeds, and now they see them as something completely different.
Well, a weed is a plant in the wrong place. So only farmers and gardeners are allowed to call things weeds anyway. But I mean, a potato could be a weed if it's grown in the middle of your cornfield from last year's crop. I mean, there's nothing by definition is a weed as such. So stop calling them names. You can't be calling plants names like weeds and wanting to make them extinct. I mean, what do you want your field for? If you want it to feed cattle, or do you want it to be a bit of both. You wanted to feed cattle well enough, not 100%, but wouldn't 98% do, and give you the other wildflower mix as well. I mean, cattle won't eat buttercups anyway. That's not why the butter is yellow, from eating buttercups. The buttercups are the one thing they don't eat. They're not eaters. They won't eat the things that isn't going to do them good. So they're not weeds, they're wildflowers. Where do they live? They live in grasslands. Leave them alone.
I might bring you to the odd discussion group with me.
Pat, we're coming close to the end. Cathal, maybe time for one last question.
Yeah, there's a good few questions coming in on forestry and organics. Pat, just maybe your comments on how far we've come in making grounds in those roads.
Yeah, I think the last government and under Pippa Hackett's leadership took a view that they were wanting to promote organic production, and I think we've seen a very big increase in organic farming. And I think I suppose a positive is that there's a lot of farmers out there now making a good living from organic farming, and it's beginning to be supported by the likes of Borbia in terms of export, because if we're to rely on just production for a home market, there isn't enough of a market there to go to any reasonable size. So I think you've seen a lot of movement in that space. The forestry, I suppose, is still very challenging at the moment. We're not seeing huge levels of uptake of the forestry schemes. I think as people get used to, or as people, I suppose, look more closely at it as an option, I would be hopeful that the incentives that are in place there at the moment can bring about an increase in forestry. I think the nature of the forestry that's being promoted now in the various sub schemes of the forestry scheme are, I suppose, much more sustainable in terms of a mix of coniferous and broadleaf, where you have conifers and I suppose a lot of support for native forestry to, I suppose, re-establish some areas of native woodland that are absolutely vital, I think, in terms of a mix in the landscape. So I would be hopeful that people will start to see forestry as a really viable option, and that we will see increased forestry for a variety of reasons.
Very good. Éanna, we have a few short seconds left. Any final comments from yourself before we wrap up today?
Well, I mean, farmers own most of the land of Ireland. Farmers are not enemies of wildlife. We mustn't see them as either or. I mean, no farmer doesn't like to hear the birds sing, and no farmer doesn't like to see the leaves coming on the trees telling us it's spring, summer, autumn and winter. If we don't have wildlife around us, how do we even know how the seasons move along? So I have great faith in Irish farmers to keep our landscape and to improve it and to bring back as much biodiversity as is possible. So Gonairi live.
Well, lovely positive note to end this today's webinar and this year, in fact. And it's hard to believe we're at the end of 2024. I just want to say a huge thank you to our audience for their continued support over the years. It's hard to believe the Signpost series started back in the midst of COVID, and we're still here based on your demand and your ongoing questions, and we really do appreciate that mandate that you have given to us. I want to say a huge thanks to our amazing team. This doesn't happen by accident. We have a really excellent team in place. Yvonne Maher, Mary O'Loughlin, Catherine Keena, Tom O'Dwyer, Siobhan Kavanagh, Michelle Lavelle, Ivan Kelly, and Cathal. You're obviously play a huge role in the webinars, and more so now that Pat has gone farming. So Pat, want to take this opportunity again to wish you well in your retirement, and I know you're not going to be lying around. You're on the you're farming now and enjoying the outdoors, and I hope that you many years of health and happiness with that. So until
sorry, Mark, I just want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the work of all the colleagues I've worked with over the years. It's been an absolute privilege to work in Teagasc, an absolute privilege to work with the people on the environmental team, and a privilege to work with a lot of other organisations that worked with us over the years. Enjoyed every minute of it, and as I say, I won't kill myself farming either. I'll take a good few days off.
Great, great. Well, look, you've nailed it there. Collaboration really is key to everything that we do. And Éanna, thank you so much for joining us today. And please God, we'll maybe do the same next year if
we're still above ground. Yeah.
Well, look, until then, we want to wish everyone a happy and healthy Christmas, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year. Our new series of webinars has been published for January, so we look forward to catching you in the new year. So until then, take care and thanks again.